we decided that this week we're going to do something exactly the same. So it'll be a little differently. So we're going to talk about coffee. Let's talk about how coffee will be affected by climate change. But we're going to alter that slightly and talk about how coffee pollinators will be affected by climate change.
Right. So last time we basically just focused on how is barley production going to be affected in the kind of attributes that will affect that, like precipitation and temperature, direct effects on the barley. But today we'll kind of focus on it's really a broader system of the agricultural product itself and the pollinating species that will perform those pollination services to even enable the agricultural cultivation of that product.
I gotta put a hold on this, Kevin. In a good way. Well, in a bad way. Well, we'll just say it. We jumped in way too quickly. I want to talk a little bit about how your fame of now being a host on a podcast has blossomed.
Oh.
So yeah, hold up. Everybody forget what we just talked about. We got to get back to Kevin.
So I think the first step to this was I finally got an Instagram, which I had been kind of a few friends back home be like, why aren't you on this? Why aren't you on that? It's really like where people are at now, how people are sharing like what's going on in their life. I'm like, I don't need another one of those shits. I was there for MySpace. I went to Facebook. Like,
dude, MySpace was the fucking shit.
That was tight back then because it was like the Wild West then. It was like only people our age were on there.
Dude, it was customizable.
There was no corporations like putting targeted ads at you. It was just what your friends were putting on there. It was really like grassroots, like punk rock type shit like I'm into.
Yeah. No, I wasn't into punk rock, but like a lot of drama started from like who is their top 10 friend or top 8 or whatever.
That is something I don't miss. That stressed me the fuck out.
Really?
Like, what are they going to think?
Me out too.
What are they going to think if I bump them down to 3? Even though they're like, oh, it's not an order, but clearly we read left to right, and your brain will naturally put it into a kind of hierarchy.
Yeah, no, it's funny because like I remember there would be drama of like someone coming up to me in high school and being like, oh, "Did you see that you're now in his top 4 and not top 3?" I'm like what? I didn't know.
What?
Looking back, how fucking stupid.
Yeah, a lot of things went like that.
Yeah, whatever. But
yeah, okay. So I got to get on this Instagram, and it's a little too intuitive and nice, even for an old fart like me trying to figure out newfangled social media. That's been my biggest adjustment so far with this
is learning how to use. Yeah, I will say, and this has been the conversation that Sam and I have all the time. It's like, Mike, use social media, be able to use technology, but it's like not a part of my life. Like I look at Facebook or Snapchat or what is it, Instagram, either before I'm going to bed or like, maybe this isn't podcast appropriate, but like when I'm pooping or like, totally.
That is the status quo.
So like, I don't know. Great. Now all our followers know that every time I post something, I'm like, it's either late at night or on the toilet.
Yeah, I think this is something. This is really going to resonate with people. Like, oh, I'm not the only one who does that. We all know everybody.
Everybody does that. Yeah. No.
It's very interesting. Like, I mean, people used to read the newspaper, and what is this now? It's basically our main source of new media, but it's just refreshed constantly, and you're getting live updates of everybody's life.
But you know what? At least it's of people you like and of things you want to see.
Yeah,
as opposed to like just
curated.
Here's some stuff you may or may not.
Here's something. Here's what happened at the county fair this weekend.
Oh my god!
Tell you I'm not following the county fair on Facebook or whatever.
Cheryl Smith her pumpkin was the largest. Okay, but speaking of pumpkins, let's move on to another fruiting plant. Mm-hmm. The coffee plant.
Much more important.
What's its scientific name?
That's a great
Candidatus albicans?
Oh, if you just pulled that off, I'm going to be extremely impressed.
I'm like dead ass, that's probably it. Total side note, dead ass is definitely only an East Coast thing.
Yeah, I've heard it. referred to as being a New York specific, kind of like hovering around there.
Because a lot of people are just like, what does that even mean? I'm like, dead ass. Like, I don't know.
Seriously.
I'm being truthful. Yeah, seriously. So it's not Canada albicans. It's Caffeine Arabica.
Ah, right.
Totally pronounced properly.
Yeah, we've heard that word before.
Yeah.
It's on the
Now that I think about it, Candida albicans is the wrong pronunciation of that fungus that like lives in your mouth.
Oh, those binomial nomenclature Latin names, they all get jumbled up in there.
If you're still in high school and you had the opportunity of taking Latin, you should. You definitely should.
Great
that was
point.
definitely
especially if you want to be in the biological sciences.
Definitely.
Used heavily. All those prefixes, suffixes, and then it takes a lot of the challenge that most people find challenging about reading an academic paper for the first time. If you have that kind of background in Latin or Greek is also used a lot as far as prefixes and suffixes, and that's where a lot of these big scientific jargony words kind of get their meaning from. They're all composed of just kind of cutting and pasting together these different Latin and Greek roots.
Which the scientists thought, oh, this will be easy for people.
Yeah, that was dumb.
Yeah,
they should have just used, at least for English, like Germanic roots and make like, you know how we say it's hot-ish outside. We'll make up some dumb word. Like, we should really start doing that for science. Like, making up words that kind of sound kind of stupid because they sound made up, but they're made up of fragments of English words or very like colloquially common English.
So it's accessible to more people.
Exactly.
Well, I really like how the whole field of fruit fly research, they name specific genes based off the mutations they cause. So they have a gene called fuzzy, which like literally affects whether or not fuzz appears on the fly, or like wingless, whether or not the wings form. Like that.
Yeah, they tried there.
Yeah, scientists should do a better job of making their jargon accessible to more people.
Perfect.
Because if more people can use the science, society gets better overall.
Boom.
And because preach, listen to us. So, okay, so back to the coffee. So today we're going to talk not only about how climate change will affect our ability to grow coffee, right? Which, speaking of, Kevin and I are actually drinking coffee right now.
Right this second.
Because, I don't know, we decided to record super early this morning. And we just have to wake up.
Yeah, I've got to get the juices flowing here.
So, but not only are we going to talk about how climate change will affect our ability to grow these plants, but also how the pollinators, which make the fruiting bodies, which we get caffeine from, like how those affect their production. So this was a really awesome study that came out by a group in Taiwan, and you have the author Pablo Imbach, and he came out of the lab of Patrick. Oh my God, I should have practiced this word.
My best guess?
Go for
Patrick R. Rohrdans.
Rotorons. Rohrdans.
Rohrdans.
Oh my. We should have someone just tell us how to pronounce names.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, okay. They did like a really awesome study, and they took into consideration that a lot of people have already looked at whether or not, certain plants can grow in certain regions, which on this podcast we've talked about sort of like how species are moving to sort of higher altitudes, and how like one thing I remember specifically talking about is in corals, like entire coral ecosystems are shifting to the north.
Different latitudes.
Because the water is cooler in there. So essentially they looked, they understood that we know where coffee will be in the next 100 years. But coffee actually comes from the fruiting bodies that form on these trees. And we roast them, we grind them up, and then we pour hot water on them. And so they looked at it and they were like, hey, these fruiting bodies form when pollinators come in and drop pollen on there. And there's actually been numerous studies that show that the different types of pollinators, so in this particular case it's bees, so the more types of bees you have, the greater yield. So, okay, there's actually three things. You have an increase in coffee bean yield. You have an increase in how large the coffee fruits are. Yeah. And then they're much heavier. So having more bees by a coffee plant yields to more coffee production.
And better coffee.
Well, I don't know about that.
I guess that's subjective. Yeah,
Where'd you get that information from?
Stuff. Yeah, but again, along with all of that, the way they kind of predicted how those different factors will change really went along great with the episode from 2 weeks ago, because they use kind of the same metric about how climate change will really affect those kind of metrics by defining climate change as when do we curb the output of anthropogenic carbon dioxide. Do we do it in the next 20 years? Do we do it in the next 40 years? Do we do it in the next 60 years? And so given all those climate scenarios, again, from a best case scenario where we curb it as soon as possible versus a worst case scenario where carbon dioxide emissions continue to grow over the years, and how is that going to affect, again, how well are coffee plants able to grow in the areas where they currently grow? And how do the bee populations of those areas also fare given those same kind of best case to worst case scenarios?
So yeah, exactly. And there's been other studies that have shown that these benefits that come from the pollinators they're beneficial when you have at least 5 to 20 different types of bees. So if you have 4 types of bees, it's not going to be beneficial. Not that it's not going to be beneficial, but
it's not as beneficial as having a greater diversity of the population.
It's not going to be beneficial enough to make like that large enough of an impact. Exactly.
And again, this goes back to talks of biodiversity. I'm sure this has come up in past episodes where loss of biodiversity will destabilize an ecosystem, meaning if there were so in this case, if there's some places that have 20 different species of bees coexisting in the same ecological niche, and you drop that down to now there's only 5, things are going to be different, especially when it comes to the ability of those 5 species alone to pollinate all of these, agriculturally scaled up plantations of coffee to be sure to get to that coffee production quota that they've been adhered to up till now.
Exactly. So coming back to the study, they took it in sort of like this 2-prong approach. So they said climate change will affect coffee production in 2 ways. One being very direct, which is literally how will the heat and drought and climate of these regions affect the plants, right? So where can we grow them? Where will they not survive? And then the other is indirectly in how will climate change affect where these coffee plant pollinators will exist. And I think when Kevin and I were talking about this before this episode, I alluded to like this being like a perfect sentence. Like this is what science is about. Like this is something we find, right? Climate change affects coffee plants. But then you got to look at it from this other section, and that climate change affects the pollinators, which then affects
the coffee plants.
Exactly. And I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked about how like water also can affect that, like in terms of beer, and that's and this was I feel like we're reminiscing because in the first episode with Sam and I, how I talked about how like there's a level of complexity in a lot of these studies, and especially in climate change, that you just have to trust the experts, like the people who put in all they go to work to understand these complexities. And you can't expect, I don't expect to understand what these people did or like all they do, but I understand and I trust that they put in the time and effort to really understand how these things should be done.
Do you tell your plumber how to fix your sink? Do you tell your mechanic how to fix your car? It's really kind of the same thing.
My dad does.
Okay. See, that's a problem here. A lot of
but he's a stubborn Italian. I love him.
Yeah, like cultural idiosyncrasies like that'll come into play. But yeah, that's a lot of what drives like climate change denialism, right? That kind of thought like, what makes you think you know what you're talking about? Well, these people go to work every day. This is literally their fucking job to study this to the degree that it is possible and build these models, make these predictions, all based on rigorously collected data. And that's what makes these kind of studies so valuable, because they're building on all of those climate models and kind of applying them to specific products or specific industries that will be affected by climate change.
And so in particular, this study actually looked at all of the historical data based on both where coffee can grow, where it grows, as well as where the pollinators have been found, all, from 1950 all the way to 2000.
Yeah.
So there's 50 years worth of data that they were like, this is the way it's been for the past 50 years, like this. Let's extrapolate this. Mm-hmm. Let's, build on these stories.
Yeah,
so we know what the fuck to do.
That idea of extrapolation is huge across the board in this kind of large-scale climate research. You absolutely have to use what happened in the past, what's different now, how is that going to change that? That's the big overall storyline to basically all these papers.
Yeah. So, okay, what did they find, right? So they had some pretty alarming things, but then also there's definitely a silver lining, and we'll talk about that. So I think the first thing, and is sucks.
Oh yeah,
like, this is
especially
definitely
for everybody who drinks coffee.
Yeah, especially everybody who drinks coffee. Not us.
Not scientists. The group of people who statistically drink the most.
Do they really?
I've read that, though that might be just some inside scientist joke, like, oh yeah, we're always in the lab, we're workaholics, like those kind of stereotypes. Yeah, but I believe it.
I mean,
just from personal experience.
I literally drink coffee from like 6 a.m. till about 12.
Yeah, easily on a normal day.
Which is not healthy. We're not condoning
please
the
don't
sole
do that.
consumption of coffee.
If you don't already do that, please don't start.
Actually, so all of my friends who know me really well know that in the past I was super sensitive to coffee. Oh. I would be like, drink coffee and have like a panic attack. Shit. Or I would like avoid it at all costs. Actually, I have to call Christina later. But so we were out camping, and somebody brought like chocolate covered espresso beans. Oh. And I was like, oh yeah, those are probably great. Let me eat some. So I had like 5 of them.
Dangerous.
Oh my god, I was like off the wall. I was freaking out. I had to take some lorazepam.
Oh my!
This was
god.
Like 3 years ago.
Oh shit! Okay. I'm like, this is like middle school, high school. What are we talking here?
Yeah, no, this was like something happened where like I couldn't even eat a chocolate covered coffee bean. Woo. To now, like I am
moment I wake up
injecting it into my fucking veins.
Yeah.
Okay,
and that does not fare well for how they projected the decrease of land that could be allocated for coffee production.
Exactly. So what they found is that 73 to 80%. Let me rephrase this. There will be a 73 to 88% reduction in land area in Latin America that we will be able to grow coffee.
Mm-hmm. For a combination of the effects on the coffee plant itself and these pollinators that are directly responsible for the longevity. That's big.
That's not like a 50% or like a 25%.
Yeah,
we're talking
are big
like
in themselves. This is
three-quarters.
Vast majority of all coffee will not be able to be grown in those areas.
And that's really sad too, because like a lot of the coffee that's grown in Latin America is like really done within this, like, I think I read it was like a 4 hectare area, or like just 4 hectare acres within the whole country that produces coffee, and like it supports like over Hold on, let me get this exact number.
Yeah, it was a really great piece in that it added that human aspect, which a lot of these academic papers I feel lack a lot of the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really was like, this is going to hit hardest. These people who are subsistence agriculturalists who really rely on this as their sole source of income. There's really nothing else in those regions besides growing coffee, and because they've done it for generations, it's a culturally ingrained part of who they are. And this is another image of the human effect of climate change, right? When we see on the news, we see the emaciated polar bear, balancing on a single little chunk of ice there. But this is what's going to happen to real people who are alive today.
Yeah.
See their livelihood stripped away from them.
So, okay, the number is that 100 million people are employed by the coffee industry just in Latin America.
Yeah.
And think about it, 88%, on the high end, 88% of the land that they currently grow is going to be gone. That is going to eliminate, estimating 88% of those jobs.
Yeah.
Like, that's scary. That is really scary.
For that many people.
Okay, so that was one thing they found, right? The other is that is in terms of the land that we can grow coffee on. They also saw that they also predicted that there will be a 65% reduction in the number of types of bees. So
there's some regions in Colombia, Bolivia, around that region of South America at least, where there can be up to 15 to 20 bee species coexisting in the same kind of ecological ecosystem or ecological niche. And some of these reduction numbers are looking at what if they lost of that 15, what if they lost 10 of those species? What if there was, a reduction of, would you say 60, 70%?
65%.
65% average. And really, they have a beautiful figure in this paper. Let me tell you, the watermark of a great paper is beautiful figures. And this is a beautiful figure. They showed the... on a map,
this one?
Yeah, exactly. On a map of Latin
America.
Post it.
On
we'll post it with it. Yeah, there's a map of Latin America, so from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, and you can see exactly the regions where there will be loss of pollinator biodiversity, kind of color coded. So regions that are darker red will have vast decimation. And you can see right in the middle of Colombia, there's just this huge part, southern Brazil looks like it's getting hit really hard too.
What is this region right here?
That's the south part of Brazil.
Let me pull up a Google.
Bad at geography.
I am so bad at
it. We got to be real with it here.
That looks like...
Yeah, it's the south of Brazil.
State of Minas...
Yeah, it's a state in Brazil. Brazil's huge, right? Yeah, so that's south. That's the south of Brazil.
This whole thing is Brazil?
That's all Brazil.
Wow.
That's how big Brazil is.
I knew Brazil was big.
It's
Brazil
huge.
is half of that country.
Half the continent.
Yeah.
Pause. I can hold...
I talk too fast for my brain to work. That's really what this is. Okay, yeah, so Brazil is... Wow. That's crazy. But yeah, we'll post this figure so you can all see. And I think I was talking with Sam about this about a couple episodes ago. How a very nice figure, 1,000 words. A picture is worth 1,000 words.
That couldn't be truer.
It's worth 100,000 words in science, because the amount of data that you shove into a little image is fantastic. Okay, all right. For the record, I can name all 7 continents. Hold up. Are there 7 continents?
There are 7
There
continents.
are 7 continents. Okay, that's what I thought. All right, so I can name all of them. And I know the difference, I think. Okay. So, we had our good laugh. And we had, the downside, and coffee's not going to do too great. The pollinators are not going to do too great. But there's actually a silver lining to this whole situation. And it's that early on we talked about how the number of types, or the number of types of pollinators that there are sort of plateaus when you reach a certain amount of pollinators, and that number was like 5 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a big range, but like so really it's 5.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found is that in these future climate models, that where coffee, the plant, is able to grow, like these regions that were suitable in the future, also were also suitable for at least up to 5 types of types of pollinators. Mm-hmm. So, yes, things are shrinking. There's going to be a smaller amount. But the good side is that, yes, these coffee plants will still be able to be pollinated by enough pollinators to
offset that loss of those other pollinators.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that brings us to another thing we wanted to talk about. So we rely, historically, we've relied on the action of these pollinators to make sure these agriculturally important crops are able to grow at the scale that we need to in order to meet demands from various human societies that use these agriculturally important crops. But now we're living in a new time where we don't have to.
Yes. Wait, no.
Sorry.
So technically, Kevin's just slightly new. And not that this is a bad thing or anything, but I like to introduce this segment.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was the conclusion of the study, right? And so we do like to end every episode with sort of like, what can you do at home, right? And I think this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers. And that's fine.
That's what we're here
for. That's what we're here for. We're here to make you uncomfortable, okay? So, right. Continue on, Kevin.
So as I was saying, historically relying on pollinators, but now we live in a time where we can custom make those plants to really be more suitable to our needs, and as those needs change based on the effects of global climate change. And so, again, as we've historically relied on pollinators to make sure these plants can remain pollinated and able to reproduce for generations and generations, now, with the advent of recombinant DNA biotechnology, which I'm sure we'll have plenty of talk about in future and past episodes.
I think future. I don't know if we've talked about this.
We haven't?
I don't think so.
Well, we'll introduce that in more detail coming up. But this is what you will generally hear referred to in common talk as genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Snap. And so what we can kind of modulate by genetically modifying these organisms is their need, or how resilient they may be to the loss of these pollinators. Maybe they are able to self-pollinate in a way that's sustainable. Maybe they are able to rely on different types of pollination schemes, artificial pollination, either by human intervention or some kind of I read something about engineering little drones to more or less pollinate in cases where there's extreme biodiversity loss of natural pollinators.
We'll make our own biodiversity.
Exactly. And bioengineering the pollinators themselves. So there's just lots of ways in which we could approach this problem using what's generally referred to as GMOs.
Exactly. And along with that, right, the thing that you at home can do is eat more GMO foods.
Absolutely. The more you support that, the more money can go back into the research and development side of those things. Not that we're plugging anything. We are not making money.
I don't think either of us work
like
in
this.
the GMO field.
Yeah,
I don't make any.
Really. No, I do in the lab. I definitely work.
But yours are like bacteria that like...
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
But so, right... We're telling you to eat more GMOs. And, like, the key thing is, like, linking that back to bees. And a lot of the GMOs make their own pesticides, or in a way, like, prevent growth of fungus or things like that. Mm-hmm. So they're not actually spraying all these other chemicals that can attack bees. So if you eat more GMOs, you limit the amount of pesticides that are out there killing bees.
Precisely.
And I'm pretty sure there's people being like, well, what about organic foods? What about those? Mm-hmm. Well, I was talking to somebody, and like people don't understand that they still spray pesticides on organics.
You actually have to spray more on organics, I guess, if they're considered to be, this was the like heirloom variety. This is what we've used for generations, and this has been unchanged, definitely untouched by DNA biotechnology. Now, a large part of the agricultural biotechnology revolution was to kind of mitigate those factors that would be limiting the being able to mass scale up the production of different crops. And what that's led to with this whole organic food movement, to my understanding, is that you now have to recompensate for the loss of those beneficial genetic mutations introduced through biotechnology. You now have to make up for that by using more pesticides, using more fertilizer. So it's really a more resource-intensive process and environmentally damaging process to actually grow these non-GMO organic foods. And then my next question would be, for what purpose or for what good is that?
Exactly. And you know, the fertilization and these pesticides that they're spraying on these organics are harmful to bees, right? So the only way to really protect bees is to eat more GMOs that have less pesticide on them, you know? And I think there was, I do want to clarify sort of like, what do we mean between like what a natural pesticide, you know, because there's one of the main differences between like an organic food and a non-organic food has to do with the type of pesticide, or like, well, there's a lot, but like one thing is the pesticide that's sprayed on them, and it literally comes down to whether or not the compound was extracted, or whether or not the compound was chemically altered at all. So in a lot of these synthetics, it has been altered in a beneficial way, and for more of these natural pesticides, it hasn't been altered. But at the end of the day, like, a pesticide's a toxin. Its goal is to kill something.
Yeah, so we can even think about, you know, natural pesticides that plants produce themselves, like in coffee, caffeine itself. Animals cannot, they don't jive well with that. It's really poisonous to them if they eat that. And yet we are sucking it down every single day. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's just a way to think about that.
Yeah, so we wanted to clarify that little controversial tidbit.
Oh, we will return to this.
Oh, we will definitely return to this
throughout the tenure of this program.
Because we think that this is a topic that the public needs to know about, and we want to educate you in a meaningful manner.
Absolutely.
So that's we'll all get to learn about all that stuff later. But also, if you want to help save the bees, when you're at the supermarket, choose to go with the GMO food over the non-GMO food. It's probably also cheaper.
Yeah. Oh,
so save your wallet
That's
so you can buy
nice.
Non-plastic and reusable plates and napkins.
Yeah, and
so
on that
also
note,
good.
If you've got any questions about specifics of that, like making these decisions, or if you've heard something about GMOs that's been troubling to you, you want us to address it, shoot us a message on Instagram. That's what you do? Messages? They still call them that? Yeah, shoot us a message on there.
They're called DMs.
DMs. Oh, yeah,
slide
into our DMs. I didn't know that, yeah. Yeah, and then we'll do our best to address that on the show, or just hit you back, and we'll have a chat about that. We want this to be a dialogue between the scientific community and the public. That's really one of our main goals here. So yeah,
even if it's just Kevin and I sitting here talking at you.
Yeah.
Still a dialogue. So that concludes this episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and as always, thank you. My name is Mike, and
I'm Kevin.
Thank you for listening to Mikroscope, presented by Whatever You Say Productions. Learn more at microscopepodcast.com. That's MIKROSCOPEPODCAST.com.